Classical economic theory assumes that the price mechanism is the best way to allocate scarce resources to produce the optimal combination of goods and services from society's point of view. Classical economists call this outcome allocative efficiency, which refers to the distribution of resources that best satisfies the needs of society as a whole. At equilibrium, the market equilibrium price is PE, and the market equilibrium quantity is QE, and this market outcome is assumed to be the most allocatively efficient, where both consumer and producer surplus are maximized. However, this is not always the case. Sometimes the market outcome is not ideal for everyone involved, and so the government intervenes for a variety of reasons. Sometimes the price is too low to guarantee producers a minimum basic income, and so the government intervenes by setting a price floor to support producers. This price floor is imposed above the equilibrium price, but this often results in an artificial surplus of the good or service. An example of a price floor is the minimum wage to support unskilled workers. Sometimes the price is too high, and the product is a necessity. The government may intervene to make it more affordable for low-income groups by setting a price ceiling below the equilibrium price. However, this often results in an artificial shortage of the good or service. An example of a price ceiling is rent controls to make rental apartments more affordable. Sometimes the government wants to discourage the production and consumption of this good or service, maybe because it's a demerit good like cigarettes. The government can do so by imposing an indirect tax, which shifts the supply curve to the left as it raises the costs of production for producers. This raises the price of this harmful good, reducing the quantity bought and sold in the market. Sometimes the government wants to encourage the production and consumption of this good or service, maybe because it's a merit good like education. The government can do so by granting producers a subsidy, which lowers their costs of production and shifts the supply curve to the right. Market failure is the outcome in which the market fails to achieve allocative efficiency. This could be due to the presence of an externality, an external cost or benefit imposed on the rest of society. If the consumption of a good or service generates an external benefit, meaning a benefit for other people, we call this a positive externality of consumption, and in that case, the marginal social benefit curve will be higher than the demand curve, which represents the marginal private benefit. Vaccines and healthcare are examples of goods that generate positive externalities of consumption. If the consumption of a good or service generates an external cost, meaning a cost for other people, we call this a negative externality of consumption, and in that case, the marginal social benefit curve will be lower than the marginal private benefit. Junk food and alcohol are examples of goods that generate negative externalities of consumption. Sometimes an externality is created by the production, not the consumption of a good or service. For example, many factories create air pollution that negatively affects the environment and surrounding communities. We call this a negative externality of production, and in that case, the marginal social cost curve will be higher than the supply curve, which represents the marginal private cost. Similarly, the production of a good or service can generate an external benefit, like the increased commercial activity in a town as a result of building infrastructure like a highway. Economists call this a positive externality of production, and in that case, the marginal social cost curve will be lower than the marginal private cost. Another type of market failure is the unsustainable damage and depletion of common pool resources. Common pool resources are natural resources that many people use, like forests and fisheries. These natural resources are non-excludable, meaning it's hard to exclude people from using them. But they're also rivalrous, which means one person's consumption of the resource reduces the amount available for everybody else. Because of these two characteristics, these natural resources are often subject to the tragedy of the commons, where they're abused and depleted unsustainably. Another type of market failure is the lack of provision of public goods like streetlights. Public goods are also non-excludable like common pool resources, but they are non-rivalrous, which means one person's consumption does not reduce the amount available for others. These two characteristics lead to the free rider problem, where people often try to benefit from using the public good or service without paying for it, and so businesses can't profit from providing these public goods. The end result is that businesses do not provide them at all. All these different types of market failure are often used to justify government intervention. However, government intervention is not without its faults. Just as there is market failure, there can also be government failure. Government intervention can sometimes create unintended consequences like artificial shortages or surpluses, and can sometimes benefit some stakeholders at the expense of others. For example, high indirect taxes may be effective at discouraging the consumption of demerit goods like cigarettes, but these taxes are regressive, which means they often disproportionately burden the poor more than the rich. The key idea to remember here is that there are no solutions, only trade-offs.